I've always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and paranormal activities were things I found entertaining, but never really believed in. That changed when I moved into my dream home a year ago. Now, I'm not so sure what to believe. It all started on the first night in the house. I had finally moved all my belongings into the charming Victorian-style house I'd bought at an auction. It was old, but had character, and I was thrilled to call it mine. Exhausted from a long day of unpacking, I collapsed into bed and quickly fell into a deep sleep. I woke up suddenly at around 3 a.m. The room was cold, unnaturally so, and I could see my breath in the air. I brushed it off as a draft, pulled the covers tighter around me, and tried to go back to sleep. But then I heard it, a faint whispering sound, like someone murmuring just out of earshot. I sat up and listened carefully, but the sound stopped. Convinced it was my imagination, I went back to sleep. The next morning, I laughed it off as first-night jitters and went about my day. But the whispering continued. Every night, at around the same time, I'd wake up to that icy chill and the sound of whispers. It was always too faint to make out any words, but it was unmistakably there. A week later, things escalated. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when I heard footsteps in the hallway. They were slow, deliberate, and echoed through the house. I called out, thinking maybe a friend had stopped by, but there was no answer. When I stepped into the hallway, it was empty. The footsteps stopped as soon as I entered, leaving an eerie silence behind. That night, I decided to set up a voice recorder in my bedroom. I needed proof that I wasn't going crazy. When I played back the recording the next morning, my blood ran cold. Amidst the usual nighttime sounds, there was a clear, distinct voice. It was a woman, whispering, "Get out." I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just an old house settling or my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I started researching the history of the house and discovered that it had been abandoned for years before I bought it. The previous owner, a woman named Eleanor, had disappeared without a trace. Things only got worse from there. I began seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye, flickering lights, and objects moving on their own. One night, I woke up to find my bedroom door wide open. I always closed it before bed, and I lived alone. Heart-pounding, I crept out of bed and approached the door, only to feel a freezing hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but no one was there. I started to fear for my sanity. My friends were worried about me, I looked exhausted, and I was jumpy all the time. I even called in a priest to bless the house, but the activity only intensified. I would hear screaming in the middle of the night, see faces in the windows, and feel an overwhelming sense of dread whenever I was alone. One night, the activity reached a terrifying peak. I was lying in bed, unable to sleep, when the whispers started again. This time, they were louder, more urgent. I felt the temperature drop and saw my breath in the air. Suddenly, the room was filled with the sound of sobbing, loud and desperate. I sat up and saw her, a ghostly figure standing at the foot of my bed. She was pale, with hollow eyes and a look of sheer anguish on her face. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her voice echoing through the room. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to respond. She reached out towards me, and I felt a bone-chilling cold wash over me. "Leave my house," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow and anger. I don't remember much after that. I must have fainted because I woke up the next morning on the floor. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed a bag and left, not even bothering to take most of my belongings. I moved in with a friend and put the house up for sale. But leaving didn't end the nightmare. It followed me. I started having vivid nightmares about Eleanor and the house. In one dream, I was standing in the attic, looking down at a dusty, old trunk. As I opened it, a rush of icy wind blew past me, and Eleanor appeared, screaming at me to get out. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding in my chest. Days turned into weeks, and the nightmares persisted. I'd wake up feeling as if someone was watching me. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, and the whispering followed me, even to my friend's place. I could hear Eleanor's voice, faint but unmistakable, warning me to leave. Desperate for answers, I reached out to a local historian who specialized in haunted houses. She agreed to meet me and discuss the house's history. When I arrived at her office, she greeted me with a knowing look. "You're not the first one to come to me about that house," she said, handing me a file filled with old newspaper clippings and photographs. Eleanor Radcliffe disappeared in 1923. Her husband, Thomas, was accused of her murder, but her body was never found. The case went cold, and Thomas eventually vanished as well. I felt a chill run down my spine as she showed me a photograph of Eleanor. It was the same woman I had seen in my dreams, the same anguished face that haunted my nights. "There's more," the historian continued. "After Thomas disappeared, the house remained vacant for years. Every subsequent owner reported strange occurrences, whispers, footsteps, cold spots. Some claimed to see Eleanor's ghost. They all left, just like you." Armed with this information, I decided to confront whatever was haunting me. I returned to the house, this time with a medium who specialized in paranormal investigations. She was a petite woman with an air of quiet confidence. As soon as we entered the house, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "There's a lot of pain here," she said softly. "Eleanor is trapped, but she's not alone. There's another presence, dark and angry." We made our way to the attic, where the medium said the energy was the strongest. She set up candles and incense, creating a circle in the center of the room. As she began her ritual, the temperature dropped, and the air grew thick with tension. Suddenly, the medium's eyes flew open, and she let out a gasp. "Eleanor is here," she said, her voice trembling. "She's trying to communicate." I watched in horror as the medium's body tensed, her face contorting in pain. Thomas killed her, she whispered. He buried her body in the walls of this house. She's been trying to tell someone for decades. The medium's eyes rolled back, and she collapsed to the floor. I rushed to her side, but she quickly regained consciousness. We need to find her remains, she said urgently. It's the only way to set her free. With her guidance, we searched the attic and eventually found a loose floorboard. Underneath, we discovered a small, hidden compartment. Inside was a collection of old, yellowed bones. Eleanor's final resting place. As soon as we removed the bones, a feeling of overwhelming sadness washed over me. The medium performed a final blessing, and we buried Eleanor's remains in a nearby cemetery. That night, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The nightmares stopped, and the whispering ceased. The house was finally quiet. I sold the house shortly after, making sure to disclose its history to the new owners. They were fascinated by the story, but I warned them to tread carefully. Some things are better left undisturbed. I've since moved far away and started a new life, but the memories of that house still haunt me. I'll never forget the terror I felt, the cold hand on my shoulder, or the anguished face of Eleanor Radcliffe. I still don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I do know one thing for certain: sometimes, the past refuses to stay buried.